Good morning, Mel.
Good morning, Fireweed. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to have a chat about Ferry Creek. We're going to have a chat about forestry issues and about your role as an activist on the front lines.
Great. Sounds good.
Maybe we could start with you telling me a little bit about yourself. I know that you are also a Denman Islander and you've been here for what, 5 or 6 years?
It'll be 6 years that we moved here in June. Yeah, we really love it. So before arriving on Denman, I had lived for about 25 years in different parts of Ontario. Prior to that, I grew up in New Brunswick and left New Brunswick at 16 and moved to Ontario. And then when my partner retired, we moved out to BC. So here we are. So we moved out and our children are all here. We have 4 kids. They're not all here at the moment. They're older. Some of them have moved on with their own lives now, but Denman is now our home base. It's been really good.
Well, it's really great to finally meet you. I'm very curious to know what drew you to Ferry Creek. Did you have a background in activism previously? Have you stood on the front lines before? I will maybe mention right here that you've been arrested a couple of times, standing up in defense of the forest.
Yes, I have been arrested a couple times now. I'm fairly new to activism. I've always cared about the environment, but having 4 kids in life, life kind of got in the way of me being particularly active. But probably starting early last year, just hearing more about Ferry Creek and just more about the climate crisis in general, it became apparent for my own mental well-being that I had to do something because you feel a lot of despair. And I've learned that the best cure for despair is action. So myself and a friend decided to go to Ferry Creek. I think it was in June. They had a sort of a big day of action. They were asking everyone to show up. I think it was Wear Red that day. And we went up and we just went for a day trip, but it was powerful. It was changing. After that, I just really felt a need to try and get back, and went back several times over the course of the summer and into the fall. Was arrested 3 times by the police while at Ferry Creek, but those didn't result in any charges, just their illegal detainment and taken off the mountain, and released in Port Renfrew once and in Lake Cowichan twice. So that was a bit of an experience. And
Wow.
and then haven't been back to Ferry Creek since the fall when the rains set in. So not super up on what's happening there right at the moment. But in January, I became active with Save the Old Growth in Nanaimo. That's where my 2 arrests resulted. I was arrested on the 17th of January for blocking the highway. And then I was arrested again on the 31st of January for, again, blocking the highway. So on the 17th, I spent the afternoon in jail. And on the 31st, I spent the evening. I spent 24 hours in jail that time. They decided to hold us. So that was, I guess to be expected. So charges have resulted from that. And my next court appearance, I believe, is scheduled for the 31st of May. So it's all in the very preliminary stages at this point in time. So there's not a whole lot of info on that at the moment.
That is quite a history for such a short period of time. So would you say that your exposure at Ferry Creek emboldened you to go the extra mile in getting involved with Save Old Growth on Vancouver Island? I want to mention to viewers that this is an organization that has involved more direct action in the form of blockades on highways as opposed to being in the woods. Am I correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, the Save the Old Growth their goal has been to, get more sustained media attention, to get it, basically to have Save the Old Growth become a household name, or at least a topic of discussion around the water cooler and the dinner table. I think they've been pretty successful with that. So yeah, it was definitely more of a direct action than what was at Ferry Creek, but absolutely my awakening at Ferry Creek, I say it would definitely has affected my choices to be arrested. Just seeing the level of violence that the RCMP displayed, particularly towards Indigenous people and BIPOC people, it was very upsetting. I understand where a lot of people have the thought of, oh no, that doesn't happen in our country, and our RCMP are there to protect us. And I agree that there are certain RCMP members that are there for the benefit of the public, but to see the way they act as an organization at Ferry Creek was incredibly upsetting as a citizen. I just felt that as a white person, I could use my privilege of my appearance to perhaps do what I would not be really comfortable asking an Indigenous person to do, because I've seen with my own two eyes how the police treat them. And I felt somewhat confident as the way I present to be on the highway in a public area that I hopefully was not going to receive that type of abuse at the hands of the RCMP. So my involvement at Ferry Creek definitely spurred my actions with Save the Old Growth.
Understandable.
I was actually lucky enough to be in the presence of Elder Bill Jones on several occasions, took part in several education circles. I was lucky enough to be cleansed by Chiokton in a ceremony. Yeah, it's really hard to explain, I think, unless, you've been there. You probably, you know how I feel. It's just magical. I don't want to sound all corny, but to be invited to help, the love that they have for people and the ability to forgive, and just, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, to see Grandma Losa welcome RCMP members into the circle. I wasn't actually there when they were searching for Bear Henry, but I did see those videos, and I was there at times when Grandma Losa would speak at the front lines with the RCMP members, just to try to get them to see people in their humanity. And very powerful, very powerful. And, I'm slightly pleased. I'm pleased. I hope it's as much as I hope it is, that now there's going to be a requirement for high school students in BC to take they're going to have some Indigenous knowledge going forward. And, it's a small step, but I like to think it's a step in the right direction, because we have so much to learn from the Indigenous ways. I have mountains to learn. I look forward to the opportunity, and I'm just really thankful that we were invited to the territory by Elder Bill Jones. I know it's not been easy. I'm sure it hasn't been easy for him being part of that community. And, I understand there's a lot of divisions within the community of what should be done and what shouldn't be done. And it's very, as a settler, you definitely don't want to be, I'm certainly not in a position to take the lead. I want to take my lead from them. But at the same point in time, I think it's really hard for some Indigenous people, just because of the level of racism and violence that they face on a daily basis. And I kind of feel like we sometimes put a lot on the Indigenous leadership. As settlers, we want them to speak out more, and then we'd be more comfortable. But I think sometimes it's hard for Indigenous leadership to speak up. There's so much with elected officials versus hereditary, and it's all very... It's a long, deep conversation that I'm only just becoming aware of.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, sorry, it was kind of rambling.
No, not at all. I think it's a very complex topic to be addressing. So building on that awareness, I'm hearing you say that you witnessed a lot of violence on the front lines. You also stood up to be arrested while you were there at Ferry Creek. Can you just walk me through that a little bit again? What happened there?
Sure. Yeah. On the first occasion when I was arrested at Ferry Creek, supposedly arrested at Ferry Creek, it was, people were in hard blocks. I had been in a hard block, and then I wasn't, because I was having to leave. And I thought I was going to be able to stay as a support person for the people that were in the hard blocks. And when the police moved in, they threw up injunction. They threw up their police tape and kind of said, you can go that way or you can go this way. And I said, well, I want to go, where everybody else had been placed behind the injunction tape or behind the police tape. And they said, no, you can only leave. And I had people's belongings, and I said, no, I can't do that. And I tried to cross the line, and I was forcibly arrested and gurneyed away and placed in a police transport vehicle with another protester, a couple of other protesters. Then we were driven to Port Renfrew. We were told we were under arrest. We asked for the injunction to be read, and they read something to us. Then we were told we were under arrest for, I believe it was breaking the injunction or contempt of court. I can't remember exactly now. And they took our information and all those things and placed us in the transport vehicle, and then drove us to Port Renfrew and told us we were free to go.
That's been referred to, I think, as a catch and release.
Yes. Yes. So that was my first catch and release. And then it happened again 2 other times. Third time it was with a group of elders from Victoria that had come up on the bus. And we just basically sat on the road and mostly, I guess, blocking the RCMP from their shift change that day. They didn't really care for that. And we were quite promptly placed in police transport vehicles, I think probably about 14 of us, and driven to Lake Cowichan and released. And on that trip, it was a hot day. People became ill in the back of the transport vehicle. Yeah, it wasn't the best of experiences. We had, the woman who became ill was quite elderly. We had, was definitely the youngest person there. It was mostly seniors. And it was a bit of a harsh deal. So, and then the second time, it was, again, all very similar, except we were released in Lake Cowichan late at night.
Oh, my goodness.
And we were lucky enough that, there was always the support people from Rainforest Flying Squad there to pick us up. But it was, it got to be a bit much of the RCMP just come in and take you and dump you off somewhere. And there's not a whole lot of explanation of, well, you told me I was arrested and now I'm not arrested. And it was all a little confusing.
And do you feel that confusion was almost deliberate to kind of destabilize people?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it was just another police tactic, I believe.
If there were an accurate count of the alleged arrests or the so-called arrests, I wonder if they would exceed the numbers that have actually resulted quite significantly, in court cases.
I would think so. Every time I was caught and released, I think everybody else with me was also same caught and released. Wow, the second time I was arrested, or allegedly arrested at Ferry Creek, there was a lot of us. They had, I don't know, probably 3 transport vehicles. Yeah, we were arrested. That was, sorry, it's all coming back to me now. We were at Red Dress. There is some video of that. That was, the police definitely targeted Cheoketon that day. They walked past us, the white settlers on the road. They told us we were going to be arrested, and then they turned to Cheoketon, who was drumming on the side of the road, and forcibly arrested him, and I believe injured his knee that day.
Oh, my goodness. So. When you speak about Red Dress, could you maybe explain to our viewers what that's about?
Sure. Red Dress is an area at up the logging road at Ferry Creek, probably, 7 kilometers or so up the main road. And it was a beautiful, not a beautiful area. It's massive clear cut, but it was made beautiful by the fact that Indigenous people largely, I think, hung red dresses, hundreds of them, I believe. The first time I saw it, there was hundreds of red dresses hanging from the stumps, hanging on sticks, and a ceremonial circle had been made, and there was a fair bit, a lot of ceremony was going on there. It was a very sacred space. The police destroyed it. The last time I was there, a small section of it remained, but the police or industry crews, maybe it wasn't the police, someone had largely removed, most of the red dresses, and the ceremonial space had been desecrated, in my opinion. It was very sad to see.
Thank you for that history of your time at Ferry Creek. I know that you're probably intending on going back when things sort of kick into gear again. It seems to me that there has been a little bit of action this spring, but I'm not sure how active it is at this point.
Yeah, I'm a little hazy on some of the details as well. I believe that Teal Jones was allowed to put in quite a few gates. Like, I know basically the whole main road had been blocked off with gates. So I assume that those are still in place. So I think it's going to be probably pretty difficult for people to access anything. I know Dr. Royanne Petrol's been trying to access the area to do bird counts. They're denying her, a biologist, the right to check on endangered species. So it's a difficult situation, definitely.
Do you feel that your efforts have been worthwhile? Would you have changed anything in terms of the risks that you took in going to support Ferry Creek and in continuing to do so?
No, I'm pretty content. I met some wonderful people at Ferry Creek, a lot of great connections. So I look forward to to hopefully one day, it would be wonderful just one day to go back and it not being about trying to save it. It would be nice if it was saved and we could actually go there to visit it and its peaceful magnificence. Because, I would love to take my children there someday.
How has your family handled this activism and your taking off to go into the woods and put yourself at risk?
Pretty sure midlife crisis was thrown at me a few times. And hey, if I'm in crisis, that's okay. I don't feel like I'm in crisis. They're initially very supportive of me going to Ferry Creek. Less so when arrests became a reality. And they were pretty upset when I was actually arrested in Nanaimo for blocking the highway. And they were very upset when I spent the night in jail. And, a lot of that is on me. I should have spoke with my family more about my intentions. So I would definitely, recommend to anyone, let the people that love you know what you're up to. And if maybe they don't agree with you 100%, probably best to have that conversation beforehand instead of after the fact. But my family has been largely supportive. I know it's upsetting for them. Yeah, it's definitely upsetting for them. I don't think anybody wants to think about their mother being in jail for the night. It seems unfair that, my two youngest children are only 13 and 15 and probably know a little more about this than I wish they did at that age. It's good to be aware, but also I think it's unfair to, put so much climate anxiety, causing my kids anxiety over the state of the planet is upsetting to me as a parent, bringing it to the forefront for them. But then at the same time, I think more of us need to be aware of what's actually going on with our climate. So upsetting as it is, it's you try and balance being active with despair. So.
Right. So in terms of support, Mel, would you have some advice for folks looking to engage as this, war in the woods, which really, I'm afraid to say, is what it is again, gears back up again this spring and summer? Would you have advice for people in terms of their preparation? You said, of course, it's a good idea to have these conversations with your family. But in general, the overall support for arrestees and potential arrestees, as in the past with different actions around this province, has involved having a support team, having some training with what to expect from legal proceedings, etc. Are there aspects that you wish you'd know a little bit more about, or you'd suggest to people would be helpful?
I would tell people to definitely, if you're planning on participating in any type of direct action, really know your own limits. Only do what you're comfortable with doing. Getting arrested is not for everyone. There is a massive need for support people, as you mentioned, and that can range from, being the people who are waiting for someone to get out of jail if they go to jail, or it can be people that are doing media, or, they need police liaisons for when we're actually doing actions. There's a lot of areas where people can support if they're perhaps not comfortable getting arrested themselves. They should also know that I think anytime you're participating, there is the potential that you may get arrested, even if you think you're on the sidelines. So always be aware of the potential for things to go a bit sideways. Know your rights. The more legal stuff I would say the better. Certain things that, like with being told I was arrested at Ferry Creek, well, they tell you're arrested so that you'll freely give your information, because that's kind of what you're told. Well, you don't have to say who you are until you're arrested. Well, they tell you're arrested. I gave them my driver's license thinking that this is what I was required to do. Well, not really. So, it is always good to really know your legal rights.
The Rainforest Flying Squad has made an effort to have that kind of information available. Am I correct?
Yes, they have, and they have a really great legal support team. So I would just say to everyone, read through all the documents that are out there by whether it's Rainforest Flying Squad or Save the Old Growth. People are doing their best to let people know this is the expectation of what may happen to you. You do have rights, and but you have to take it upon yourself, I think, to educate yourself as best you can. That being said, going forward, I think the governments and the RCMP have made it quite clear that activists are going to be dealt with pretty harshly going forward. I think probably most people, if you're thinking about you may get arrested, you should probably think that you're going to spend a night in jail, maybe more. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think people need to be real with that.
Yeah. One of the first interviews that I did on the Ferry Creek movement was with lawyer Kara Hunt from Duncan, who was active early on. She was representing Rainbow Eyes initially. She made it clear that people should expect these civil contempt charges to change to criminal charges. And I think a lot of people were still taken by surprise when that happened.
Yeah.
But we can no longer afford to pretend that that isn't a very likely outcome of choosing to get arrested, right?
Yeah, I agree totally. Dissent is no longer, if it was ever welcomed in this country, they don't really want to have a discourse with us. Mm-hmm. They don't want to talk. They would be happier if they could just throw us all in jail and keep us there. And I kind of think that's that's the route they're planning on taking. Yeah, so some other activists have done some other actions, and people have spent a fairly significant amount of time in jail without trial. You know, just being picked up and held without trial for 8 days in solitary. That seems a bit harsh for people who are only trying to raise awareness. It's nonviolent, so yeah.
So speaking of the Save Old Growth movement, which I think is what you're referring to now, Mel, in terms of the road blockades, do you want to mention how you got involved with that aspect of the movement? Because it's separate from what Rainforest Flying Squad is doing at Ferry Creek.
Yes, yeah, it's a completely separate movement, and it is separate from Extinction Rebellion. I believe there's a bit of overlap, but I think most of the organizers from Save the Old Growth, they may have been involved with Extinction Rebellion, but it is now its own group, largely led by, I think they're mostly in university. They're young people, and they're putting themselves out there. I've never been all that involved with Extinction Rebellion. Right. I've kind of learned a little bit more because there's just a lot of overlap with activism, I think, in general. It's been interesting being involved with Save the Old Growth. I guess I just became involved. I think I just saw something online, really. I'm not sure if it was on Facebook or where it was exactly. And I, thought I would get involved, and I made the connection, and I just kind of showed up at an action one day. I did the online training and everything that was asked, and then I showed up, and I did have a friend there acting as a support person that day, and also happened to be Martin Luther King Day. So on the way to Nanaimo, I was listening to Democracy Now!, and it was all Martin Luther King speeches that day. So that was kind of empowering, I felt.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mel, what you were saying about there being a distinction between Extinction Rebellion and Save Old Growth Forests reminds me just how common it is for social justice movements, certainly the environmental movement, to bring people together and then also to create new ways of moving forward and engaging. And that diversity is a really important part, I think, of any kind of social change. It's okay for people to align in arenas that they're ready for. Not everyone is ready to be arrested. But when you talk about the Save Old Growth movement, that kind of direct action, similar as it is to Extinction Rebellion, does put people in a position of possibly going to jail for extended periods of time. Are you prepared to go to jail for months if necessary?
Yes, I am. Not saying that lightly, but I have had that conversation with myself. I really hope it doesn't come to that. I do not want to go to jail for months. I realize that, yeah, there's probably a good chance that I will see the inside of a jail again. I know my family's not happy about that, but I also feel that, this is a desperate time. We really only have a few years left if we're going to make a meaningful difference. And, as a mom of 4 kids, I feel immense guilt. I love my children. I don't mean to make it sound that I would ever have not had them, but knowing what I know now about the state of their future, what their potential future could look like, I feel really guilty. I don't know how else to describe it. Responsible that my children, and if they decide to have children, are not going to have the same wonderful existence that I've had. And it's the reality for a lot of people already alive on this planet. Like, I have the privilege of choice. A lot of people don't have that choice. And I think if putting my body in jail is going to be of some help, then that's what I'm willing to do. I realize that that's maybe not a choice that everyone's going to be comfortable with, but I hope that people will do what they can, because I know a lot of people feel a lot of despair and they push it down, but let it fuel you. Do some good.
I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to touch on today in regards to the politics in this province, given that we are facing what seems like a great deal of greenwash from our provincial government.
Save the Old Growth's the big ask is to stop all old growth logging in this province immediately. It's a carbon sink. There's solid science behind that we should be doing all we can to save the old growth with wildfire and drought and flood and all of these things. It's really disappointing that our current BC NDP government seems so bent on promoting LNG and trying to force a pipeline through unceded Indigenous territory. And they want to argue for LNG up north, but then John Horgan wants to try and greenwash that he actually wants to stop TMX in Burnaby. I don't buy it. They're bent on destruction. The fracking, Site C, it's all tied together. And it really is time for people to really wake up and hold the politicians to task. Start conversation with your MLA. Try anyway, because they're resistant. And if they're with the NDP, I find they're really towing the party line. It's difficult to get traction with the politicians. And I think that's why people are turning to nonviolent direct action. Mm-hmm. Because it is getting us the awareness that our politicians are not giving us. They won't meet with us. I phone Katrine Conroy quite regularly and ask her, how would I go about meeting with you? Because you won't meet with the representatives of Save the Old Growth, and all you hear is crickets. You never get a phone call back. So yeah, I think it's really time for people to turn up the heat on the government, because they're going to turn up the heat on us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really, really hear you on that anxiety level of what the future holds for next generations. And I'm sure that you've inspired others to step it up a notch.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Thank you so much, Fireweed.